This show is sponsored by Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interview titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. My guest today is a best-selling author, an award-winning CEO who is committed to creating inclusion for all. She speaks about her personal and professional journey through the lens of someone with a visible disability and shares what it's like to lead through a world crisis and live life without limits or labels. Her TED Talk is not just another lecture of what you're not doing, it's an invitation to look at where you may be hiding in your life and opening the conversation for defining diversity differently. She was honored as the youngest alum ever awarded the Goucher College Excellence in Public Service Award. In 2014, she was given the Smart CEO Brava Award and profiled as a CEO in the New York Times corner office. She also received the Trailblazer Award from the Community Resource Exchange and the Unsung Hero Award from the Female Founders Alliance. And she's a proud board member of the Lucky Finn Project. She demonstrates the power of living authentically and enables the recognition that our differences are our greatest gift. Please welcome Ruth Rathblott, MSW.
Thanks, Michael. I'm excited to have this conversation with you today.
Same here. You know what? I had meant to ask you this. What does the MSW stand for?
It is a master's in social work. It's probably the best degree I ever have gotten. And I will say I encourage so many young people and people thinking about what they're doing with their lives to get a master's in social work, because it's such a good grounding of how we think about systems and how we think about strengths. It's definitely probably one of the best degrees in how we understand policy today. All these policies that we are living with, where did they come from? How did they affect people? How are they affecting people?
In this master's in social work, is this when you were working in the non-for-profit sector that you received it?
No, I went after college. I was trying to figure out what to do. And my mother was actually going back to school, and she was getting a master's in social work from Columbia University. And I was watching her. And what was amazing, Michael, is I had wanted to be a psychologist. And what I saw her doing with her master's in social work is she was going into the field right away. She was having clients right away. Like, it wasn't having to all do book learning and then you get clients. It was a combination of your book learning and your being with clients and your field practicum. So I was between getting a doctorate in psychology and a master's of social work, and the master's of social work stuck. And I did that at Boston University and thought I went there to be a clinical social worker, seeing families and kids. Had my first internship in a public school working with young people. Got a little bit frustrated because you could work with young people, but then you weren't necessarily working with their families in a school system. So they were going home to some different environments and you weren't able to change those. And so then I spent my summer between those 2 years of graduate school getting my master's in Appalachia. And I came back and I was working with women and female entrepreneurs and young people. And I came back and thought, there's no way that I want to be in an office for 50 minutes listening to people. I want to be out changing the world. And so I came back, got an internship working for half the time was working for the Mass Committee for Children and Youth. And half the time was working in a settlement house in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and running a girls group. And just, it was the best of both worlds. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I don't necessarily want to be in an office for 50 minutes.
You did that for over 20 years, and I'm going to kind of just jump a little ahead for our listeners here. And there's a reason for it. We're going to rewind and go back into your backstory and all that. But I also think it's really important that we jump ahead right now, just so that our listeners can get some context, because they can't see you. And so I think it's really important that you share a little bit about your story and the inspiration behind helping others, and your book and your TED Talk about being visible. And I'm going to leave it to you to unveil what you're making visible.
Sure. It's interesting. A few years ago, I was in a conversation, Michael, about diversity and leadership. And I imagine your listeners can resonate, because diversity is a big topic these days, right? DEI and B now, belonging, is part of our daily conversations, some with controversy and some with acceptance. Mm-hmm. And I was in this conversation, and I asked a very naive question as the leader. I said, "Do you see me as diverse?" And the answer back was, "Well, you're a woman. And I identify as white, female, she, her pronouns, heterosexual. So I'm probably not who you typically think of when you think of diversity." And the answer back from some people was, "Well, yeah, you're a woman." And I said, "Okay, yes, gender, check that box of diversity. Correct." And I said, "What about my disability?" Michael, I was born with a limb difference. I was born missing my left hand. And when I asked that question about my disability, people said back to me, "Oh, well, I don't see you like that." And I said, "I'm not actually asking to be seen like anything. I'm asking for it to be acknowledged as part of this diversity conversation." And I got upset, naturally, because I didn't feel included in the conversation. And what I realized was I hadn't shared my journey with anyone about my disability in my workspace. I hadn't talked to them about what it was like to have a disability, what it was like to learn how to accept a disability. And what was, I guess, the other piece to this equation was I started to reach out to my corporate partners, where I'd done a lot of fundraising. I'm in New York City, so I'd done a lot of fundraising over those 25 years in the nonprofit world. And I was asking them, how are they talking about diversity? And one of my contacts invited me to come in and speak. And what I realized was I didn't know if I had a story to tell. And he said, "Oh, just come tell your story," like a lot of people do, right? And I said, "I don't really have a story." And he said, "Ruth, you told me that for 25 years, you hid your hand. You didn't show it to anyone. That's a story that you can tell." And I went in, Michael, and, I'm in New York City. So anytime anyone offers us a free car ride somewhere, even if it's 5 blocks, we take it, because it's like nice to be in a car. We don't have car. We don't drive here the same way, other than Uber now. And so I went down, I did it. And what resonated this in my speech with people was 2 things. One is people came up after and thanked me for including disability, both visible and then non-apparent, the invisible disabilities like mental health and neurodiversity, in my speech and what I was talking about, because it doesn't get included often in diversity talk. And I think the thing that has probably stuck the most from that speech on, and now at companies like Facebook and Bloomberg and Barclays, is this idea of hiding. And that most of us are hiding something. And so I've pivoted, for lack of a better word, and started to tell my story with the resonance that hiding is universal. Hiding is the problem that many companies and many people are facing, because we feel like we have to fit into something. And so that's the journey that I'm on now, is how do we talk about hiding and its effects, and how do we learn to unhide? Because I went through that journey.
Yeah, and I remember us talking on a Zoom previously where you were telling me about how you just kept your hand in your pocket and nobody noticed. And I am so shocked by that. I was wondering, because as we just talked about earlier, I started watching your TED Talk that you did. We're going to definitely dig into your TED Talk. And then in there, you were mentioning even dating and keeping your hand in your pocket or unseen. And I'm just wondering, I'm thinking from my perspective, right? Whether I'm dating or just seeing somebody on a regular basis, did they maybe have some sort of inkling or a conversation behind your back of, hey, what's up with Ruth? Why does she always turn that way? Or did you ever notice how her hand never comes out of her pocket or any of that? And Ruth is nodding no. So I'd love the verbal response from you now.
Yeah. I think, I don't know what their conversations were behind my back.
Right. Because they were behind.
I do know that I got really good at it. It was, whether it was hiding it in my pocket, wearing longer sleeves, like, we're in winter right now. And I feel like winter was always kind of my favorite time because you could wear longer sleeves, bigger jackets, bigger pockets, mittens, like I didn't have to show it. I hid it behind bags. Like, so yes, you're right. Like in relationship, you feel like you notice things about people, especially if you're physical with people in terms of touch, etc. Like you would think people would notice. I think there probably were. And yet I guess there's two parts. I was really good at hiding it so that people wouldn't notice it. And I deflected a lot, right? And then I think when we deflect, we also build walls around ourselves so that people don't ask and they don't think it's comfortable. What I came to find out, it's interesting when I was writing my book, is that I did ask that question, Michael, to my college friends. I said, how come we never talked about it? Like, how come we didn't go there and talk about it? And the answer back from many of them was, there was a definite wall, Ruth. That was something we learned we don't talk about with you. And when my book came out, one of my friends said, this gave us permission to finally talk to you about it. Your book gave us permission. And I think many of us are waiting for sometimes that permission to be able to ask questions that we know someone's dealing with, but we don't know how to ask them. We don't know how to open those conversations. And so by unhiding, it allows for the connection with other people so they can ask questions. And it also allows the internal connection so that you can ask yourself the questions about how what you're hiding is holding you back.
How do you think you would have responded had they have asked you in those college days?
It's interesting. One of my friends, I remember in college, saw somebody with one hand at playing pool at a local bar. And she said, oh, do you want to go and talk to him? And I said, absolutely not. No, I have zero interest. Why are you even thinking I would? And that's what I'm talking about in terms of the defense, right? Like I was so defensive about it, again, internally and externally. So I think if they had asked about it, it was a non-starter. Again, it sounds extreme, but I think they're having done this work for the last few years and hearing people's stories of what they're hiding. It's not alone. I'm not alone. And I think oftentimes when we're hiding things, we think we're the only ones hiding it, whether it's a financial background, whether it's the college that we didn't really go to, whether it's or that we went to that we didn't get such good grades at, the way we left our last job, Michael, the way we didn't get promoted, those things that we don't want to share with people because we're afraid of judgment and rejection.
And I asked that question because what you talk about is to be seen. And from the side that I'm coming from is, how can I see you, right? How can I start a conversation? And if I do, how is it received? Am I pushing too much, too fast, too soon? Are you ready to respond? A lot of questions there, but I'm kind of just laying the groundwork for the idea of when, especially with what's going on in our society today with gender equality and everything in that space, of if the person's not ready to speak about it, is it right to ask them about it?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting fine line and an interesting path to navigate. I think that I'm someone who likes to talk about it now, right? And so it's understanding where people are on their journey. I do think I have asked people about their disabilities and differences over the last few years. And I respect when people don't want to talk about it, right? Like it's about understanding that there are boundaries that somebody may have or where they are on their own journey of difference. And so I think it's okay to ask, but I ask people to think about Is it coming out of a place of kindness? Is it coming out of a place of support? Because curiosity without kindness and support isn't really curiosity. It's just wanting to know something. But is it curiosity with kindness and support? And then, Michael, I think the other differential is, are you willing to share something that's different about you? Are you willing to be vulnerable? Are you willing to have a conversation? Because if you're only asking because you want to know something about somebody and to support them, but you're not willing to be vulnerable yourself and share something about yourself, then it's not really a conversation. And that's where I spend a lot of my time, is working with leaders to model that, because we often, and I'm sure you've seen kind of the popular topic right now is, oh, we want you to bring your authentic self to work. We want you to bring, that piece. And we're not really actually set up for people to bring their authentic selves to work.
No.
We don't.
And maybe we might want to put an asterisk next to that, right? Like maybe we don't want.
We don't really want it. Right. And yet the people who are asking us to do that are not actually even willing to do that themselves.
Right.
I had a company recently who said, we want you to come in and speak. And I said, okay, so what would success, like when I went through my conversation, I said, so what would success look like at the end of this 60-minute talk? Like, tell me my keynote, what you want it to look like at the end and people walk away with. And they said, it would be great if everybody in the audience unhid something about themselves. And I said, absolutely not. This is not the Jerry Springer show. This is not like, this is a first step in the conversation, because hiding, again, has a history often. It's painful. It has ramifications potentially, that of what people will think about you in terms of judging you and rejecting you, and there's fear. And then I said, unless the CEO is willing to go first. They set the model and the tone for culture. They set this psychological safe space, because it's not psychologically safe to unhide if you don't have the parameters in place, if you don't have the leaders going first and willing to do that. And so I said no. Like I did my keynote, right? But I said it's not safe for people. And so there's an element of safety that also comes with why we're asking and how we're asking, and being okay when people don't want to go there.
I think it's important for us to go back to that whole why you're asking, because that answers a lot of the questions. Is that if you are self-aware while you're asking and are asking yourself some of these questions first, that might get to the point of, okay, maybe I should hold off on my question, or no, this is a valid question.
Or am I asking out of support because I'm looking to help someone out of kindness? Listen, I was crossing the street just 2 days ago, and there was a woman, Michael, who was not going to make it across the street. She was an elderly woman who was using a walker, and there were 8 seconds flashing on the screen. And I was like, oh, she's not even like a quarter way across the Amsterdam Avenue in New York. And 2 people were looking at her, and we were like, what do we do? Like, how do we get her across the street? Like, how do we move her? And it's down to 7, 6, and she's not even halfway across. And I'm like, and my heart's going, and I hadn't noticed her at first. I had watched these 2 people looking at something, so I turned, and one of the people went to her and said, can I help you across the street? And she batted him off. She's like, no, I don't need your help. And I think I tell that to you because 2 things. One is, I think sometimes we make assumptions about people, right? And what they're capable of. This woman, probably, she's got the lighting timed. Like, she knows how it's going to get her across the street. Like, she's got it. This is her thing. I think that's what my assumption was. Again, another assumption. But she didn't want to be helped. And I think sometimes we want people to be okay, so we make assumptions about how we can support them without actually asking them, right? So there's that. What I didn't realize is that the other woman wanted to help her because this elderly woman's shoelace was undone. She's like, she's going to trip over herself. Like, it's not even about that she can't make it across the light. It's her shoelace. And again, it's observing sometimes, like, why are we helping people, right? What is the full context of what this is? It wasn't just because she was using a walker. It was because her shoelace was untied. And we all know what happens when we trip over our feet, like when our shoelace isn't done, and it's annoying. And so sometimes it's just gathering information before you make an assumption about someone, and thinking about, to your point, what do I know so far? Am I helping out of kindness? Am I helping out of support? And would I want the same done to me? Like, what does that look like?
I think that's a good way to frame it for all of us. I'm really curious right now, because of this topic of conversation, and when you were asking about sharing something, a vulnerability or something. So I'm very open about something that happened to me a long time ago. Back in 2004, I had a skiing accident. And so I'm interested in your perspective on how this is viewed. So is this viewed as like, so I'm showing Ruth my arm, my right shoulder was dislocated and fractured. And so therefore when it was dislocated, it was done so badly that all my nerve endings tore. And so therefore I don't grow any muscle there. So it's really just a bone. And it was limiting in the beginning because I'd have to overcompensate, and I'd get some really bad neck strains. I've had to go to the doctors or emergency room because the strain was so bad at times where I was frozen in a certain position. And so I had to get put on some really serious painkillers, miss work because of it. So I am just interested because I've never perceived myself as disabled. I would never, identify myself as that. But I am interested from your perspective, since you do such work with people in this capacity.
Yeah, I think, listen, I think there's a couple things I am reacting to. So first, thank you for sharing that, because I think it allows me to get to know you better, right? And it allows me to get to know something about you, so that there's a connection, right? Because when we share parts of ourselves, we connect with people. Like they get to know, hey, you're not quote unquote perfect, right? Like it's a part of you that is perfect, but it's part of you that also probably at times has felt imperfect. So
very often,
right?
Very often.
Yeah. So that allows us to kind of relax our shoulders and actually have conversation, rather than, oh my God, I have to prove to you that I'm smart. I have to prove to you that I'm together. Like, we allow each other the space then to really connect. And that's the beauty of sharing. So thank you for sharing that, Michael. And I think your audience will appreciate it too, because I think we all have those pieces of ourselves that we feel like we've had to overcompensate around. We've had to overachieve. We've had to figure out things on how we're going to do it, and struggled through some things and succeeded through some things that maybe we don't always share out, right? So there's that piece. I think it's also helpful because it allows people to support you in different ways, right? If you're missing work and people don't know about what's happened to you, they might make assumptions. I might even argue they will make assumptions about performance. Like, oh, well, Michael's just not coming in. He's a slacker. He's not into this job. Oh, why is he on pain medication? Is he a drug addict? Like, we start to make up stories when we don't have information. So there's that piece. And then the question you asked about disability, I think disability is a journey. I think that it is part of an identity that took me a while to get to for myself. I think it is for me, it's not about something I don't have. It's actually about a community that I do have now, that I understand how I get strength. I understand that I've had challenges. I understand things in a different way, and it's a shared community. So I have shared experiences with people because of it. I leave it to everyone on how I don't determine who identifies how. And it's funny, I was in a conversation recently with someone who said, why do you always talk about your limb difference when you're talking about disability? And I said, well, I actually use both terms. I say I have a limb difference, my hand, and I have a disability. I use the words to describe part of my identity. And this person said, I wish you would stop saying limb difference. And I said, why? And he said, well, it takes away from the disability community and the strength, because you're partializing out or portioning out part of your identity. And it's funny, someone today posted, and the reason it is topical is somebody posted today saying, let people self-identify however they want to self-identify. Stop
Mm,
telling them how to identify. And so I tell you that in terms of it's wherever you are on this journey. And if you
mm,
don't see it as a disability, it's not for you right now.
mm.
I do think that at some point, all of us will be affected by disability in some manner, whether we're born with it, whether we acquire one, or if we're taking care of somebody with a disability. So disability will impact all of our lives.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know I've spoken about it on my pod. I almost know. I can't be quite certain about speaking about my shoulder injury on my podcast, but it's something I do speak about openly. But to your point, it is interesting when you brought up the work thing, because I did lie to work about my injury. I didn't tell them it was because of this shoulder that when I moved this, I got hurt. I don't know if there was any shame in it. I think it was just maybe a feeling of nobody's really going to understand what I'm saying. And also, maybe I guess this would go in the bucket of shame of, I don't want anybody saying, oh, poor me, right? Like right? I guess that would go in that bucket. But it is something that I do hide as best as I can, in the sense of, like in pictures, I always make sure that I get photographed with my left shoulder facing out. I will move when I have guests come here actually to the show. If they are on my other side, I'll say, oh no, switch sides with me, and I'll mention why. But still, for me, it's something that when I look in the mirror, it always bothers me.
Yeah, it's something that it sounds like that you're self-conscious about.
Yeah.
The challenge is that we often think we're the only ones.
Right.
Like maybe days that you're like, oh, the shoulder, I got to move. Each of us, this is where it's universal. Each of us has something where we feel that way about ourselves.
Yes.
It's not always physical. It often is not. It could be something, again, I've had people unhide to me about their financial situations. And you're saying, well, that's not as bad as my shoulder. Well, for them it is,
Yeah.
right? Like, they're like, oh, I'm in debt, yet I'm showing off that I have all
Right.
the best stuff. I have people tell me about their education levels, their sexual orientation, their marital status, their childless status, their children's status. I mean, the list goes on. Mental health. And so what happens though is when we think we're the only ones, then we do those things, right, to navigate so that people either we control the situation and there's certainty in that. And I guess the other thing is we think, and maybe it's true, that we're making people comfortable if we don't show that part of ourselves, right? Like there's a discomfort when we have to say, oh my God, what happened? Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were in financial debt. Oh, I didn't know you had a skiing accident. Oh, I didn't know that your shoulder, all those people, like, I didn't know about your hand. And then we don't want to be pitied, right? So we make it comfortable for other people to not have to deal with it. So we move. It's a piece of it.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that and allowing me the space to share that. Another part that you talk about is neurodiversity, and that's one that I have spoken very openly about on my podcast, which is about my dyslexia and having issues there with reading. And in fact, I had a guest on where I was reading her bio, as I did for you, and there was a word there. I can't remember which word it was, but there was a word there that was a fairly common word, a little bit more high level, but a fairly common word, one that I normally wouldn't have any issues with. But on air, as recording it, I couldn't say the word, and I was having trouble sounding it out. And so I said on mic, I said, I think this word is spelled wrong. And I put the paper down and I looked at her across the table. She was here in studio, and she goes, "No, I don't think so." And I looked at the word again. She said the word out loud, and I said, "Oh yeah." And I read it, and I said, "Oh, we need to do that over again." And she goes, "No, keep it." And I was like, you know what? You're right. We should keep it, because if I speak about dyslexia, I mean, this is it happening in the moment. Like this literally happened.
Right. And so why do we have to make everything look perfect?
Perfect, right?
Perfect. Like that's the life thing here is our imperfections are our perfections. Like that is the goal here. And I think, when it comes back to your podcast and also your listeners, like I think about entrepreneurship, I think about leadership. And as leaders, I mean, I adopted a very old school leadership mentality, Michael. I thought to be a leader, you had to be perfect. You had to have all the answers. You had to keep people at arm's length. Like that was the way that I operated. And I think there was probably a small portion of people that that really worked for, by the way, who liked that too, because they were probably hiding also. Like they liked the distance that, and I'm not advocating for Jerry Springer moments or like tell-alls. I'm talking about how do we connect as humans? How do we engage so that people feel comfortable when we're supporting them in our team to come to us to say, wow, they're not perfect. Like, how do I connect with them or our customers or our clients? Like, how do we actually, because unhiding is about connection.
Mm.
That's the key to this whole thing. And, we have a serious loneliness epidemic going on right now, where we feel like we don't belong. We feel like we're disconnected. So, what's the antidote for that? And I believe it's just like what you just shared, which is I'm going to tell you about two things about personal about myself so that I become human. Like it's about humanity, right? And me telling my story, my hand is not that important to you, but what's important, I imagine, is me talking about how I've hidden it and like what it meant to me to hide it and like how I overcame that by letting people in and what that journey looked like.
Yeah, and I'd like to go to that journey. As I mentioned to you, I was watching your TED Talk, and I didn't get to the end yet. And yes, I can't wait to watch it, and I will. So she has a wonderful TEDx talk where she speaks about her experience of hiding her hand, and I didn't get to the unveiling yet. So spoiler alert, everyone, if you're about to watch the TED Talk. But in that, you were talking about different ways that you hid it, and one of them is, you're working for a law office and you're cutting things and you didn't cut it right and they were really upset with you and they really were degrading. And yet, instead of maybe showing them and saying, hey, look, here's why, you went and hid in a basement and found a better way to cut the paper. And you have several stories in there that you share about how you hid it. And I'd love if you can just maybe expand on that into what you talk about in that of unhiding.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think I got a message from that the conversation that it wasn't a safe place to share about my hand. And I think oftentimes when we get a message that something's not safe or that we're not comfortable, we overcompensate and we figure things out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I started to stay later so that people weren't around and I could get things done. I went down to the basement, to your point, and found a place where I could get it done. I also used huge law books to hold down the paper so it wouldn't move. Because if you've ever tried to cut a piece of paper with one hand, it doesn't work out well. I can just tell. I used to do it in person in audiences, and somebody cut their pants one time, like trying to do that activity.
From an emotional standpoint, in that moment, where were you emotionally? Did you ever break down and cry? Did you ever have a breakdown in that moment?
No, I was more embarrassed, and the embarrassment propelled me to, well, I had two schools of thought. One was I quit this internship, like I just leave because doesn't feel right and I can't do it. And that wasn't my style. So I had to figure out other things to do. I had to be creative and think about how to overcompensate, how to overachieve, because I was an overachiever and I liked gold stars and I liked straight A's. Like I liked that mentality. And I like to be good. And it's funny when I tell that story, people get really upset at the boss, right? Like they get really upset because why would he asked me, and if you haven't seen the TED Talk, watch it because it's good, and I don't say that because of me.
No, it is good. Yeah.
This scenario is good in the sense that he asked me if I went to kindergarten. That was the way he opened the conversation about my poor work performance. And he didn't let me finish. And I couldn't even in that moment think about who my kindergarten teacher's name was. I was in college, Michael. So I knew I went to kindergarten. I'm like, wait, what? And I left his office because what he said was, if you had gone to kindergarten, you would have learned how to use scissors. And I left his office totally embarrassed. And people get mad at his character. And what I say to them when they get mad and tell me I hate that guy is I say, yeah, but he didn't know. And they say, yeah, but he could have been nicer. I said, absolutely. So how, as a manager, are you being that guy, right? What are the assumptions that we make about our employees when they're 10 minutes late? And I was a time watcher when I was a manager, so I get it. Like, what are the assumptions that we make about people, like you missing work because of your shoulder accident, right? Like, how do we actually pause for a second? Because we're so focused on performance and productivity, we forget about people as managers. So I say, he didn't know. So that was not his fault. What he could have said is, what's going on? He could have paused the situation and slowed it down and said, I'm wondering, this doesn't seem like your kind of work. So what's happening? And created that space. And I might not have told him because I was so buried deep in hiding, but I would have known it was a safe place that when I was ready, I could have come back to. You know what I mean? And I say that and I share that story because I think, again, as managers, we jump to conclusions sometimes. As team members, we jump to conclusions. As clients and customers, we jump to conclusions. And we forget to sometimes just slow down and ask questions that we would want to be asked if people were making assumptions about us. And I think I don't know that I ever cried about it. I don't think that happened until much later in my life, like about like the sadness about the grief of not having a hand, dealing with it for so long the way I did. But I do remember the embarrassment and the kind of being upset, like that somebody would challenge me like that and think I wasn't smart enough or I couldn't do something.
Yeah, and I asked it from the emotional part because, I think that there's some. I know with me and my injury, I had that emotional, I guess, breakdown of sorts. I had the anxiety in the beginning of I'm never going to have my shoulder again, and I remember those feelings. The term that kind of makes sense to me a little bit is that phantom feeling, right? Where I would have that weird phantom. Oh, and then it was like, oh no, I don't have that muscle. And it took me a long time to be able to lift my arm up in like normal ways and what we know as normal ways. And I play basketball and it's my right shoulder. And so I couldn't play basketball the way I once did. I now do, but I have to strengthen my other shoulder muscles in order for me to be able to continuously play the way that I want to play. But I do remember having that moment of like just being really upset. And I think that came from a victim place as well. And so I'm interested in we're going to get to the TED Talk stories, of course, but while we're here, in the idea of gratitude for everything else, I'm interested in your philosophy on that.
In terms of gratitude for the way that life has happened, is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah. And what we do have and what happens for us.
It's definitely a journey of acceptance, right? And I think, Maslow was brilliant in his hierarchy of needs because self-acceptance is at the top of it. And I think when you can get there to a place of really accepting yourself, the gratitude comes with it. Because I am grateful, Michael, that I have my hand the way I do. Like, it has connected me to people in ways that probably most of your listeners can't imagine, right? Like, I get to connect with people on a very different level because I actually find people fascinating and their journeys of what they're hiding and they're unhiding. I am the type of person, and I think I may have shared this with you before, I'm the type of person when I get on an airplane, and there's only a few of us out there. When I get on an airplane, I'm excited to see who I sit next to. Like,
oh yes, you did tell me this.
I do not put my earpods in. I don't put my sunglasses on and hoodie on. Like, I don't do any of that. I am excited to see who I'm sitting next to because there's a story. And I have met some incredible people on planes who have stories that are, I remember it wasn't so long ago, it was within the last year, I was sitting next to somebody and, you get to the chit chat of, oh, what do you do? What do you do? And he was telling me about his graphic design business. And he said, well, what do you do? And I said, oh, I talk about hiding and that most of us are hiding something. And how do we learn to unhide? And he immediately dropped his head. And that's tell for me. I'm like, okay, what are you hiding? And he said, I never went to college and I never tell anyone that. And I said, why? And he said, because I'm so afraid that people will not think I'm smart enough, They won't think I know how to run a business. And yet I have this successful graphic design business, but I don't want to tell people. And he said, when that conversation about college comes up, all I want to do is leave the room. Like that same metaphor of you turning yourself when you have a guest, that's what his feeling is about leaving the room. Like he wants to leave the room. And yet it holds us back because then we're afraid someone's going to find out at some point. It's like a bad episode of the show Suits. Like it's it's the idea that we're going to be found out and something bad is going to happen. People are going to reject us. They're going to judge us. We'll not be able to survive. Yeah. And it connects us to people when they do share. Because then when I told him my story, he was like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one that was hiding. I'm like, no, hiding is universal. The challenge with hiding is that it's exhausting and it's lonely. So when you ask about gratitude, I am grateful that I'm not hiding in my life anymore.
Yeah, it's so true with what you're saying about being, what was it, true to yourself or really accepting yourself. And, for me, as I've gone on my self-discovery journey, the more that I've learned to accept myself for all of my flaws and goodness too. I think that that's also very important. We think that by being humble, it means to just degrade ourselves and speak about our flaws. But it's also good to acknowledge what we are good at and our strengths as well, and to acknowledge those and be grateful for those as well. And to your point, go ahead.
Sorry. No, please go ahead.
But I was just going to say, to your point, is that when I have gone through that, what we're talking about right now, I'm like, oh, it makes life so much easier. And it's like, really? That's it? Like, I don't need it. And then you don't need anything else. It's like, I used to speak to my coach about a new car all the time. I used to talk to her about it. I say, I got to get a new car. What does it mean for you? What does it mean for you? It means success. It means I made it. It means I'm earning money. It means all these different things. And, as we continued and I still want a new car, but it's for different reasons now. It's just more because like that car's really old and has a lot of problems. But when through the self-discovery and self-acceptance, it's like, nah, what do I care? I don't need a new car. I'm good. There's so much more to life.
There's so much more to life. And I think you start to see the things that you've been challenged with as gifts, right? There's gratitude in it because then you understand like, hey, it's slowing me down for a reason. Like I almost don't want to fully accept things because I don't want any other things to be challenged by. Like I'm good. Like this is good. I'm good. Like I want to I'm good. But I will say my hand is definitely my greatest gift. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. And
the greatest thing I was given.
And in that gratitude that you're talking about of accepting and everything, I want to get back to your TED Talk here. You started accepting it and realizing that it was probably time to start sharing. And I'd love if you can get into that, because what you're talking about and we're talking about, but what you're saying in the beginning here is that that unhiding, right? So we have to be able to be true to ourselves and be able to come out. How do we do it, right? Like, how do we build the strength to do it? When is the right time? Where is the right place? And your story really tells that.
Yeah, no, it's realize I say yeah, no a lot.
It happens in interviews. It's all good. We don't have to be so polished in interviews. You know, two professional speakers here. We could say our ums.
Right, unhiding. There's an for you. Unhiding is a journey. And so I don't want to leave any of your listeners also thinking that it's an overnight process either, Michael, because it's not. It's a journey. And what I've started to delineate, and I do this when I speak now, and it's also in my book single-handedly, is it's a journey. And I look at it as 4 steps. The first step is, how do you acknowledge it to yourself, right? How do you acknowledge that you're hiding your shoulder? How do you acknowledge how it's holding you back from connecting with people? How did my hand not let me feel like I could keep living and doing the things I wanted? Because it stopped me from doing a lot of the things that I loved doing because I was afraid that people, again, I go back to fear of rejection and judgment. So that first step becomes, how do we acknowledge what it is that we're hiding to ourselves? Whether you do it through therapy, whether you do it through journaling, whether you do it through just taking some introspection time on your own, meditation. However you get there, it's about the idea of awareness. How do you acknowledge what it is? That's the first step. And then the second step becomes, how do you find your person to tell that this is what you're dealing with? And I imagine with you and your listeners, when I say that second step of finding your person to tell, there's a go-to person that comes into your head, right? That's somebody that you would tell, whether it's a best friend, whether it's a family member, a coworker, a manager, someone in HR, like somebody that is your go-to, that you're willing to share, hey, this is what I'm hiding and how it's affecting my relationships, how it's affecting my work. I often spend a lot of time in the corporate space. So a lot of what I do is talk about work, how it affects you and your work. And so it's that go-to person that becomes your person that you tell about it that can help you start to uncover the things that, and discover some of the things that you may not have right in the stories that you've told yourself. Because oftentimes when we have been in hiding and not sharing part of ourselves with people, we tell ourselves these stories that we are convinced are true. I was convinced that my hand was awful to look at. I was convinced that people would reject me if they saw my hand, and it was so disgusting and awful that I actually wouldn't even show it to a therapist at one point for weeks. And so what that finding that person does, it starts to dispel the things that you're hiding. And it starts to challenge some of the truths. And so there's a journaling activity and that I do with people around, what is it? Who is that person for you? What characteristics would you want them to have? If that go-to doesn't come to mind, what is it that does? The third thing and the third step becomes, how do you start to build your community around others who have shared experiences with what it is that you're hiding? And so that becomes, that's as easy right now on the internet as a Google search. It also can be a meetup. It can also just be telling a few friends. And at this step, I also think about the privilege that I have because my limb difference, I was able to find a supportive community. And yet, Michael, in 2024, when we're recording this, there are still groups of people who aren't safe to tell their story to people, right? To build their community. They're still struggling. And so it's just finding a few people. It doesn't mean having to, post something on Facebook and hope that people find you. It's just finding those people, a small group of people, a community. Mm. And then the fourth step, so after you've acknowledged it and you've raised awareness for yourself, you've invited somebody in to help you, and the third step of building your community, that fourth step becomes sharing your story out loud. And it doesn't have to be like what you and I do of getting on stage and telling the world your story. It can be just a few close people. But what that does is it allows people to see themselves in you. Mm. So I had a young woman that I was talking to, and she said, Ruth, I went to this company retreat and I told them about my anxiety issues because I wanted them to know me better. And I wanted them to, get to know me and not make assumptions about my behavior at work, et cetera. And afterward, people came up and they thanked me for sharing that. And she said, what was amazing is a guy came up to me after that and he said, thank you so much for telling us your story. He said, because I'm on my own journey with ADHD and I don't know how to tell people. And you've given me a glimpse into what it can feel like and how supportive this community is. You made it okay to actually tell my story. And I'm like, that's the power of sharing your story. And so this becomes almost like a flywheel or a loop that then other people then start to think about, what is it that I'm hiding? Oh, who is my person? Like it becomes this whole loop of connection. Mm-hmm. And that's the gift. And that's what I hope that your listeners are taking away from it too, is like, because it's not about my hand or your shoulder or the guy that didn't go to college. It's the idea of, wow, what is it that I'm hiding so that I can thrive and I can belong? Mm-hmm. Like so that I feel different about my life.
Yeah, I like the fact that you bring up connection because that's how I've always felt about mine. Is there's been a connection for me of when, I wear a tank top when I play basketball. So I've played basketball shirtless in the park. And so I don't hide it. And I welcome when people ask me what happened. I had a guy actually who's an ER doctor who I play with. He stopped a game. When he first got to know me, he didn't know. He stopped the game because he thought that I had just dislocated my shoulder because of its appearance. And I said, "Oh, no, my shoulder, that was years ago." And I told him. So I love this conversation because it's gone to the point where what you're talking about, which is what I was once. I don't think I ever was hiding it to the degree that you talk about with your hand. But what I want to share is that it has connected me. People see it and they ask me about it and we talk about it. And there is a connection. And I mean, my Sunday crew who I play basketball with they tease me about this, but it's welcomed. For my free throw shooting, I do a little shimmy, and that shimmy is to adjust my shoulder because of the way it is. It needs to be adjusted before I shoot. So I always do a little shimmy with my shoulder, and so they all know. They go, too many shimmies if I miss. They'll tease me. They'll go, he did too many shimmies. So it has, to your point, it has a connection to it. And I also love the fact of what you're sharing in that when you're unhiding, there's by taking this, being vulnerable and taking this veil off, you allow for other people to be vulnerable too, and they get to share with you what they're hiding. And there's an empowerment that happens. And so you mentioned about us speaking on stages, and there's a reason why we do it. And I'm going to throw this back to you in a second. I know for me, I have a story that I want to share. I'm not ready to share the story yet because it hasn't come full circle to where it's in a safe place to share it. But there are a few people in my small circle, and to your point of this, there's a few people that you can share it with that I have shared it with. And it's given me the power to be able to push through the anxieties and distress and the judgment that you brought up. In that when I was able to share it with these trusted people, family members, my spouse, when I was able to share it, and I remember the fear that I had prior to sharing it, I was white-faced and totally scared. Like life and death were as close as I can describe the fear. And when I, to your point, unveiled it and shared it, it's now a power that I have that I know is a story that I must share with our community because I'm not the only one experiencing it, and there are so many others who are hiding. There's no doubt about it because of what it is and the level of attention it receives in other places that I know that other people are dealing with it. And so my goal is to be able to share that story to empower others. And so I go back to you now with your story and how you get up on the TED stage and how you write books, and you're writing another book. And I mean, your book is single-handed, right? Like you're acknowledging this. And where I'm going now for you is the purpose, the drive behind your message.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing it. And I can't wait for your story to get out to the world because I think that is what the goal of Unhiding. And Michael, when I'm building an Unhiding Institute right now, which has a research component, it has the media component, it has the speaking component to it. And I would love to invite you to be an Unhiding ambassador at some point, because that is truly, that's the gift, right? Because it's about connection. It's about feeling less lonely. It's about the empowerment that someone else can get from our stories. That's why we do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting. I had so many things as you were talking, because there is in our space, when you share parts of yourselves, you become unforgettable, right? So when I was hiding, I was forgettable. People kind of were like, oh, okay, she's that person that does what? When I unhide and people know my hand, they know that's part of me, but it's also something they can't forget. Like they're like, oh, wait, she's the one. And in our speaking business, we want to be the people that people don't forget, right? Like that's a goal. So that's a proud moment for me. I think my North Star and what I'm really shooting for, like what wakes me up every day, is I want to create a place, and especially a workplace, where there's an Unhiding manifesto that we value different experiences. We value different perspectives here. We value difference. And that's what unhiding becomes, that if there's a safe place to bring your best self to work, not your authentic self, but your best self. So how do we support that? And I was on a panel yesterday and someone said, rather than us talking about DEI and DEIB and all of that, how come we're not talking about humanity? And I really loved that, because I'm like, how do we talk about humanity with creating places where people can unhide and feel safe to unhide? Because that's what we all want. We don't want to walk around thinking that we're the only one hiding, with all of that fear and that judgment and all that self-talk that we do too. It's exhausting. It's lonely. We want connection. That's what we're craving. So how do we create spaces for connection? And that's what unhiding is for me. It's a bridge to connection. Hiding. Sorry.
No, please go.
No, hiding is the problem. And it's funny. I've had different people say, like, start with the problem. Like, the problem is hiding. So let's look at hiding as the problem. It affects our retention. It affects our engagement. It affects the innovation that I wasn't my full self when I was hiding. And I know the different people I've talked to over time, it holds them back, what they're hiding. So hiding becomes this problem, this workplace problem, this entrepreneurial problem. Unhiding becomes a bridge to the solution, because what we're all looking for is connection. So that's the goal.
And I was thinking with your goal there and how it goes even deeper now, you made me think about it with some recent interactions I've had and something I've seen recently, a post that I saw recently, in that when we also look at what happens in urban settings and gangs, and we see where I'm going here with this, a lot of that is hiding, right? It's hiding when, I started a podcast with a non-for-profit in our community called Family Services, and the podcast is created for the kids that go there, and they show up to the podcast studio. And it was when I was first meeting with them, it was, what do you want to talk about? And it was like, oh, maybe they're going to want to talk about sports or whatever. And it actually got a lot deeper. It got into bullying. It got into being homeless. It got into some serious things that I was not expecting. And they are unhiding, right? They're sharing these stories. But what I'm sharing that's interesting about it is from the first view of them, they have their Jordans on, they got their cool trendy jeans on, they got the trendy outfit on. These are sixth graders and seventh graders. These are 13-year-olds. Image is everything. And so I see them at first, and I'm like, oh, cool. Like, these kids must be the ones in this urban setting. It's in an area that it's mostly Section 8 housing and of lower means. And I'm like, oh, these must be the ones that actually have higher means, that are doing all right for themselves. Yet they're showing up to this building. So I'm curious, like, what's going on here? And one of the girls said something about homelessness, and we can't be any more homeless than we already are, she said. That's literally what she said. I haven't forgotten that. And just thinking about how they're hiding behind this image of, I'm all right, I got Jordans on. And as I was looking at, in the next meeting that I had with them, I was like, I wanted to look a little bit deeper. And it wasn't to unhide them, because I didn't say anything out loud. It was just for my own knowledge. I was looking at the Jordans. I was like, but how are they affording these Jordans? Because these are like $200 sneakers. And I'm looking at them, and I have a Jordan collection of my own, and I had been gifted a pair of Jordans that I was unsure about. So Jordans, and we're talking about Michael Jordan sneakers here. And so anyway, so I know how to find them. And so when we went back in the studio and I was looking at them and I was looking at her Jordans, and I went, okay. So they all have Jordans on, but they're also all not real. And this isn't the important part for them. The image is important because it at least portrays a certain image for them, but they're hiding behind it. And where I'm digging a little bit deeper here of the importance of this in our conversation is that while the girl is talking about bullying, the bullying comes out of people trying to show that they are stronger than what they're experiencing at home, that they have more than what they're experiencing at home, and taking it out in these alternate ways.
Absolutely. And I think there's a couple things that I also want to pull out a little bit from what you're saying, because I worked with young people for 25 years of my career. Like, that's where I spent most of my time, is working with young people. And I think the first piece is there's a very healthy part of development of individuation from your parents and fitting in with your with your group, right? With your that's a very healthy adolescent development. Erickson's talked about it. Freud talked about it. Everyone has talked about that stage of individuation. And how do we, I think, working with young people from low resourced communities and under resourced communities, I think there is a continued and high pressure to fit in and to have things, right? There's a material aspect that shows that that means you made it, or you're getting your money from somewhere. Like there's a space. I know when I remember one of the young men that I worked with at one point, we brought him he was interviewing for a job, and we talked about, like, what are you going to wear for your job interview? And he's like, I'm going to wear lots of jewelry. And I'm like, okay, look around at the company. Like, do you see people wearing lots of jewelry? I'm just curious, out of curiosity. And he said, no, but that's how I'm going to make my mark, and people will know I'm something. And we had that conversation about what does it mean, right? Like what do you see? Because I think it's exposure for young people too, about what is important, what are the values, what are we thinking about, and that takes work. That's not an overnight thing. It's also not a judgment thing. Understanding what that meant to that young man. And I said, you can wear all the jewelry you want when you get that interview, when you get the job. Like, let's think about the job first and how you're interviewing. And it may sound a little bit like code switching or hiding. And I think there's a difference. Both are based in fear. So there's a piece of natural adolescence, which is about fitting in. What I also hear when you're talking about gang inclusion, and when you're talking about bullying, and when you're talking about homelessness, is that idea of connection, Michael. Like that word connection. That's why the young people that I've worked with over time form into familial relationships that they may not have in other places. It's why they're looking for connection. So that connection starts really young. The idea of wanting to connect with your peers, wanting to fit in, wanting to have connection. And I think the other piece is sometimes with young people, and I know I have been guilty of it because I just did a keynote for a group of college students, and I went in and I thought, these college students are going to think I am so corny. Like, and I had this postcard activity where I asked people to put down what they're hiding, and I said, I don't even know if I really want to do it with the college kids. They're going to think it's so stupid. And I did it anyway because I'm like, you know what? That's what I do. Like, I'm not going to stray because I think something's corny. That's like, but I mentioned it. I said, yeah, you know what? This is how you want to be treated. You're in college. You want to be treated like adults. Like, this is how I talk. This is what I do. And afterward, I was signing books that they received. And I always ask, I said, oh, I'm just curious what resonated with what I said, what my message. And a line of kids, and one young woman comes up and she says, I said, so what resonated? And she said, in a really low whisper, Michael, that you probably couldn't even hear, she said, your postcard activity. And I said, what about it? Because I had this bias that young people, not only were going to think it was corny, but that they were not hiding anything because they're all over social media with all of their stuff. And she said, your postcard activity, because it's the first time I've ever been able to share my secret with anyone. That's what hiding is to me. That's the pain of hiding, is that we feel like we can't talk about it. We can't share what's happening in our lives because, again, people will reject us or judge us. And so when we create space, when I ask people to write it down, they can't unsee it. They may not, I take the postcards with me and they may not have it in front of them. But when you've acknowledged something, you can't unsee it. Mm-hmm. It's like when we say, I don't know, there's that video with, people watch it. It's a basketball game, actually, speaking of basketball. It's a basketball game. And then you get to the end and you're like, did you see the gorilla? And you're like, no.
I know it.
And then you go back and you're like, oh my God, he was there the whole time. What?
Yeah.
Like, you can't unsee it once you've said it out loud. And so that becomes the exercises. That's the first step, is acknowledging it. Because once you acknowledge it, things start to fall into place, especially if you do get some guidance and some coaching around it.
Yeah, and what I was speaking to as well in all of that is what you're talking about, which is the defensiveness that you put up around it, which leads to the violence and all the other issues that occur. So you're able to, yeah, it's all those defense mechanisms that we put up. That gorilla one got me. I thought I was going to be so good at it. And you're a fellow Toastmaster too, I believe, right? Aren't you a Toastmaster? You're not? Oh, I thought you were for some reason. I thought we had that conversation. All right. Well, anyway, it was at my Toastmasters meeting that it was shared. One of the Toastmasters did a speech on that and shared it with us. And I remember she said, watch this video and see if you notice some. It was like, I think it's counting the balls. I think that's what it is. There's a distraction. There's a distracting element in it of counting the orange balls and the blue balls and things like that. And I have to, and it's like how many blue, how many orange, and it's like, and did you see the gorilla? It's like, wait, what? what gorilla?
And you watch it again, and you can't not see the gorilla.
Right. It's so crazy. You're like, how did I not see this?
Yeah. No, it is that. That's what unhiding is, and that's what hiding is. And it's funny. I also want to share. I had a recent trip. I was able to go to Antarctica, and when you talked about the story that you're working on to tell, and it's full circle, Michael, in front of me, I saw a whale breach. I saw the whole thing, and it was so satisfying. And it reminded me when you were saying about your story, like that full arch, like that full moment is so, and I'm going to use that as a LinkedIn post because that I wrote it down because I'm like, oh my God, that's a good LinkedIn post about how that full unhiding, what it really feels like is that full, you see the fluke and all of it. Like, it's beautiful.
Well, I have something for you with that LinkedIn post because I was going to segue us to there. And what I was going to say to segue, which you can steal if you like it, was going to be about how unhiding, right? And what's our most hidden continent, which is Antarctica. And
nobody goes there.
Nobody goes there. You had the opportunity to go. Your father had encouraged you to go see Antarctica. And you're like, why am I going to go there? And I believe it was Joe Rogan had a guest on talking about Antarctica. And he said, all that's down there is scientists and all these different things. And so I am interested in you sharing it. You segued perfectly. You knew exactly where I wanted to go. But speaking of the unseen, because there's so much unseen in our Earth, in our planet that we don't get to experience, and you got to go to Antarctica, and you blew me away when you told it to me earlier, because I'm like, first of all, I just watched a learning video on it with my daughter, and it's just like, it can get down to like negative 80 degrees or something. I think it was the coldest was ever recorded down there, negative 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So I would love for you to share that little story there about Antarctica with us.
Yeah, that's definitely in the winter. And I went in the summer, which is the opposite months, right? So the December season is their summer. So it doesn't get there. I will say New York this week that we're recording was colder than Antarctica.
Wow. I've gone out in a t-shirt, so I could wear a t-shirt in Antarctica.
Oh, you definitely could. I mean, it was not as cold. I mean, I remember the first day we went for a hike, and it was a long hike, and I want to say it was over 2 miles, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you're trudging through mud and all the snow and ice and whatever. And it wasn't 2 miles, it was longer. And I remember we had so many layers on because we thought it was going to be so cold that it was hard to walk. Like, you had all that on top of it. I will say the beauty of Antarctica is multifaceted. I think the animals that you see there that are indigenous to there, but that have migrated there are unbelievably amazing. From penguins to fur seals to whales to it's a beautiful place. I think what's really fascinating is, and we do this, I think, in our own lives, so it will resonate, I imagine, with you and your audience, which is sometimes we see something. And so I would look at this penguin colony filled with thousands of penguins. And I'm like, it looks so boring there. Like, what are they? They're just sitting there. It's so boring. You get up close and you walk with them. They have their own world going on. Like, they are diving into the water, out of the water, mating with each other, holding each other's eggs, doing all this stuff, combating fur seals, worrying about these birds that are going to steal the eggs. Like, it is, there's a lot going on. So I use it as a metaphor because I'm like, we often make an assumption that something looks one way, and yet it is this world is beautiful and gorgeous and like juicy. So I loved Antarctica. Every day I woke up like a kid at Christmas, Michael, thinking, what am I going to see today? Like, what glacier, what iceberg? I mean, the iceberg, we saw an iceberg. It wasn't A23 that most people are on the hunt for. We saw D30. It was a 15-mile iceberg, D30A, 15-mile iceberg. Like, that's city blocks. Like, that's bigger than Manhattan. And just this iceberg of like all these different shapes, and that there's a blue that the ice turns because it compresses. That is so gorgeous. It's like nothing I've ever seen in my life.
Wow.
And I think being on a ship with people for almost 3 weeks also allows for connection and community. And I think that was a big piece for me of my learning is for the last 4 years, many of us have worked from home and done a lot solo, especially entrepreneurs who are solopreneurs who are building businesses and leaders. And yet I know about myself, and this may resonate with you too, is I crave connection. I crave people. I love the idea of being able to say good morning to people and how are they? How was your weekend? And so that I realized is a real need of mine. And so how do I create community now that I'm back from that trip? Because I saw it and I can't unsee it.
Yeah, I enjoy a good connection too. It's funny when you talk about the airplane. it is funny. It is. I think it's kind of how it happens though, right? Because when I first get on an airplane, I want to get settled in, and I need that time to get settled in before I get into the whole Q&A. And then I think the other side to it all for me is I know I can talk, obviously. And so I'm also very self-conscious of, am I going to really bother this person by getting into a long-winded conversation?
But they have a choice. That's the thing. Like, they have a choice. And it is the idea of like, how do I not take it personally if they don't want to go there? I mean, you're going to be on a plane sometimes for, let's say it's a 4-hour trip, a 10-hour trip. I've been on 15-hour flights, not even to say hello. Like, really? We're people.
Oh, yeah,
like,
no,
that's connection. Come on.
Yeah.
And you can't tell me what you did, like where you went, like where you're headed. Like, really?
I remember as a little boy being on the plane. We were headed to probably the Dominican Republic because we went there every summer. So that's the only one I could think of that might have been the situation. But I remember it vividly. I was walking down the aisle and this guy, he probably was like a 20-year-old, had a Game Boy out at the time. And obviously it's when Game Boys were hot, right? And I probably was like 6 or 7 or 8, somewhere around that range there. But I remember it. And I stood over his shoulder. He was on the edge of he was on the aisle seat. And I stood over his shoulder and was just watching him play. And I was just like, I didn't have one. I didn't, but I was enamored by it. And I was just asking him a ton of questions. And I kind of remember him being like, all right, are you done? Can you go away? And finally being escorted away by, I think my parent came or somebody that worked there. But I just remember that feeling. It was like so weird. Like, it's so weird because it always stuck with me in terms of conversations of like, oh, I should probably end this conversation so I don't bother them. It's so funny the things that stick with us from
stories that we have. Like, it's the images. I was just talking to somebody today. Like, that's the goal, right? We don't actually have written stories in our heads. We have just pictures. We have memories.
Yes.
We have these ideas, these flashes.
Right.
So that story, Michael, I imagine I wouldn't take it out of what potentially could be a story for you, right? When you're speaking, like that's, we don't know, like it's not filtering out things, just writing them down, being like, oh, what are those memories that are jogged when I hear something or that I walk with?
That's really cool that came out of there. I love that. Speaking of stories, so you have another book that you're working on right now. And if you could just share with us a little bit of insight as to what that one's going to be about.
Sure. So Single-Handedly is my journey of hiding to unhiding. That's my first book. And it's really the stories of my hiding and how it started and how I learned to unhide it, and really in depth in terms of vignettes and then insights and then reflection questions so that people can think about, boy, what is it that I'm hiding? Where is it? How have I thought about difference? How do I think about difference? How do I go on this journey myself? And then the second book is focused on connection and leadership and loneliness. Like there's something in there around why is it? Because as I shared before, as a leader, I had definitely adopted an old school leadership mentality, this idea that you keep people at arm's length, you don't connect with them in personal ways. And yet, I wanted that for my staff. I wanted to build culture that way. And I often delegated culture to my team rather than being a leader and owning it. And I share that out with leaders. And I think that I don't want to say it's a universal yet, but I think there's a common thread there, that it's not so unheard of. And I'm wrestling with, why do leaders go first, right? Like, why is it important for leaders to model culture, to own culture? How do we do that through an unhiding framework? And how is it connected to loneliness and belonging? Because I'm using the case example, Michael, of Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. In 2014, he did a Bloomberg article on his sexual orientation and why he was coming out. And he hadn't been hiding his sexual orientation in his personal life, but he wanted his workplace to know, so that if any employee ever felt like they needed support, that they needed, that there was something different, that they had a place, that this was a supportive environment. He was willing to model that first and thought it was really important that that's the culture he was setting. And we know from the research that companies who value difference are the most innovative companies. They're the most creative. So if those two things are true, that as a leader, you're going to model this and actually want it, because you know that the company that you're leading and building values difference, you're going to get the most innovation. You're going to get the most productivity, the retention, all those things that you want. So that's why leaders go first. So it's an examination of leadership, how we do it, and look at it. That's it. And there's a loneliness piece in there also, like, because being a leader has lonely parts to it also. So what's the loneliness factor, and how does connection build into that? So it's being built right now, but it's definitely focused on leadership and connection.
That's so cool. There's a lot there. There's one thing that stands out to me in terms of the vulnerability of a leader. It's interesting. I literally was just thinking about this yesterday because of a keynote that I landed, which is really cool. One of my very first keynotes. And so I was thinking about bringing out a cinematographer with me who I work closely with as professionally, but also as one of my mentees, who is also one of my coaching clients. And so the reason why this kind of hits home for me with what you're bringing up is I was thinking, okay, how can I save on cost if I bring him with me to record me? And also it'd be a really great experience to share with him, right? Like, I'm thinking of it as, it's a great experience. He's a new entrepreneur. He's really young. He's 20 years old. He's a new entrepreneur. This is a great experience for him. He'll record my keynote. He'll record my activities. This is really good for me on that end. We'll have some really good one-on-one time to be able to help him and him helping me, quite honestly. And I won't be alone there, right? Like, I'm going to this conference. It's my first one. It'll be 3 days. It'll be nice to have someone there with me. Even if he's my mentee, it'll still be nice to have that person there with me. And I thought, okay, how can I, I'll pay for his travel, and how could I maybe cut on costs? Maybe we'll share a room, right? And as soon as I thought of the sharing of the room, the wall went up but wouldn't that change? And this is almost a question still, right? Wouldn't that change then the way he views me? Wouldn't that change our relationship? And, there's like, let's say this element of maybe curiosity or maybe unknown that is part of the mentor-mentee relationship, right? Of like, never meet your idols kind of thing, right? Not that I'm his idol, but like, never meet your idols, because then you know the real them. And so you could only imagine in an intimate setting like a hotel room for 3 days, how, of course, we're going to get a lot more intimate and get to know each other on a different level. And maybe we're not asking for that kind of sharing or that much intimacy, but I am interested, because it did cross my mind of like, well, if I did that, would that change our relationship?
That's an interesting question and a way to think about it. It's funny because when you're talking, I'm also thinking about boundaries and the idea of what does it feel like to have boundaries. And I only say it, I guess, from two spaces. One is, as a speaker, it is a lonely job. Like, it's lonely, right? We get up on stage, even though people think, oh, well, you're talking to people, so how could it be lonely? And you're like, well, yeah, but I leave the stage and then I'm done. And then people are still connecting out there, and they're going to hear another speaker, and they're on. And so there's a loneliness to it. there's also sometimes a recharge that needs to happen because we've poured out a lot on stage. Like we've been, as vulnerable as we can be. We've told stories, we've brought up the energy, whatever that looks like.
There's a come down,
There's a come down. And so sometimes we need that space just to be in our head and not worried about what someone's thinking about our breathing is too heavy or that, wow, aren't they going to shower at some point? Like, how come they didn't brush their teeth yet? Like all those things that you might be watching. So there's that space I think of as a speaker, like being protective of the boundaries that you may need, like the self-care that you may need, because it's a lot. And then I think it's the boundaries of just human beings, like sometimes need space. It's great to meet up for breakfast. I don't know that I want to share a room with you either, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's nice to have connection, but I want to also, and I'm just that person. There are lots of people who love to share rooms. I know I get invited when I go to any National Speakers Association. They're like, "Oh, do you want to share a room?" I'm like, "No, I'm good. Like, I don't."
Yeah, I don't want to share a room.
You have to be comfortable with that yourself. The other thing, though, Michael, I might make a plug for as part of as you growing your community and business is National Speakers Association, because I think that's a space where these kind of things come up, right? Like where you're like, "Oh, wait, am I the only one that's ever had to think about sharing a room with the person I'm bringing?" Like, probably not. And there are people who, again, do share rooms. Like, I just know why I love NSA is because of, and especially the New York City chapter, is because if there's a community of people who have been through this, who've walked on this path too, who have that shared experience.
Yeah. And so one, of course, the community piece there is huge in what you just mentioned there of being able to kind of have this open dialogue and kind of a conversation around it. And I agree with you 100% in that we do need that downtime and recharge. I know that after talking, after my podcast, I am exhausted. I mean, I do 2 of these in one day, but I'll tell you what, on my second podcast, I'm always okay if they're always like, "Hey, can we reschedule?" I'm like, "Yep, sure can." Because
I've known that, Michael.
Oh my goodness. No, because there's so much energy. But as you can tell with our meeting today, which you are the second one, I still bring I'm charged up by our conversation, just like we are charged up on stage. Something else that happens, which is very interesting, and I want to go back to the leader thing and boundaries, so I don't want to forget that for us. That's very interesting with being a speaker is the what I think people and I'm interested on your experience on this. Feel that their feedback is important to give to us as speakers afterwards. And it's interesting. I bring this up only because when you said that loneliness after, where the people are networking and they're talking and everything, what I've found is like after I give a talk, people want to come up to me and they want to shower me with wonderful compliments, which I always appreciate as well. And they also want to share with me their feedback on the talk and the things that maybe I could have improved on. And I appreciate that as well because I want that too. But what it does remove for me is I'm not able to network with them, right? Because they're coming to me, giving me their feedback, their compliments or their thoughts and everything. And so it removes the idea of, yeah, hey, by the way, I also want to get to know you and I want to talk with you and I want to sit with you and get to know you, not from the, oh, there's Michael, the speaker, but from the, hey, I'm Michael and what's your name? Like, let's just talk.
Well, and I have 2 immediate reactions to that. And I think there's a need that people have, right, with that feedback thing. So I actually learned and now address it. And I don't know if you've used this tool, and I'm happy to send you a link, is Talkadot. Because Talkadot allows for, and I'll send you a link because it's really amazing. It allows for the feedback piece, right? It allows for them to get that need out there. And it also allows you to build leads and to build a community where you can connect with people email wise, so that they have that space, to be like, oh, Michael, I wanted to tell you this. They have that space in that. And I build it into my talk. It's before the closing. It's so that, hey, I've given you a lot. I would love to, I'm building an Unhiding community. I'd love to hear from you. What resonated? What is it that you want to share with me about how could I do better? Because I'm always looking to build.
Yeah, we are.
Do better. And so people have, it's like that need that they do have, right? And I learned from somebody that I don't ask for feedback on talking because a lot of these people aren't professional speakers. So why am I asking? I ask for it in the Talkadot form because there's a constructive place to give it.
Yeah.
When people then come up to you and they're not professional speakers, they don't know that the sound check didn't work because of the microphone. They think it's you, like that you didn't know how to use a microphone. No, that's not actually true. Or that, they were running 30 minutes behind and they only gave you 15. And you're like, oh, okay, so I've had to shorten it. And they're like, it wasn't really in depth. Yeah, no, I know, but you don't know the behind the story. So like that feedback isn't so helpful. Like,
or they weren't paying attention during your talk and they missed a key component.
Right. So that's a place for, I think Talkadot is brilliant at it. Has a space, and again, I will send you the link.
Cool.
And it's great. I think, it's great. I think the other piece is, I ask people what resonated with them when they do want to give me what feedback, like if I'm signing a book or I say, I don't say anymore because I think I probably started with, oh, what did you like? Whatever. And that isn't the question I actually want to hear. I want to hear what resonated because I want to know what I need to do more. Right? Like, yeah, what stuck and what else how do I keep talking about this? Because you always are tuning into your audience, right? And I know it just got to me because I heard a great speaker, Eamon O'Brien at NSA last Friday. And I've heard it about 1,000 times from people. And how sometimes you can hear a thing 1,000 times and finally you get it when someone else says it. And I was like, wait a minute, because I've been struggling, Michael, with the idea of, okay, I'm going to tell my stories. Wait, I have to tell stories that they're going to understand, like they're going to relate to. And what I didn't realize is I thought, I have to tell my stories or I have to tell their stories. No, I'm telling my stories that are resonating with them, and what's the lesson from them. And it was this connection that I needed to get but when I asked the question, or I should say, and when I asked the question, what resonated, I do hear back those stories that they say, oh, when you said that story about that, law guy who criticized you, I've had a boss like that too. He was terrible. He was the worst. That resonated with me. I understand. And I said, so are you a manager like that? Like, that engages, to your point, that networking conversation then. It allows for that.
Oh, okay.
Speaking thing is it's a interesting business because you're always learning.
It is. It really is. I know that I when I was first wanting to become a keynoter, after keynotes would speak, I would always go up to them and speak with them, and I'd ask them a lot of questions. And I did have one keynoter. She actually sat with me. The first one that I did it with, he was like walk and talk and walk him to his car, and that was it. The second one, she actually sat with me for close to an hour after her keynote to share with me her knowledge and her experience and to walk me through some of my questions I had. And I really appreciated that. She's really, it was really, really impactful. And so you're right. There is a way to provide feedback because I was giving feedback. I was like, that was amazing. How did you do that? And to network and to open up the door to networking to where we were able to sit at the table. I want to go back to the boundaries thing. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and how can this be useful to their company or to wherever they're working, right? Because I think or how can this be useful to them outside of what they heard in 60 minutes or even less sometimes, or sometimes longer. But we know that one keynote isn't going to change their lives forever. It's planting a seed. Yeah. So how do we actually help them grow that seed? And I know that sounds cliche, but how do we start to develop that so that when you network, it does become a conversation? Say, oh, you know what? I help with that. That's the stuff I do. I'm a coach. I have a podcast. I have this. Yeah.
What was cool was I didn't have any of that when I first met her. So that was really cool. It's really cool to catch up with her. Back to boundaries. So a Brene Brown fan myself. I know that you are one too. I think that what's really important about bringing this piece back for this conversation is when you were talking about Tim Cook and coming out, and I was bringing up the story of perhaps maybe sharing a room with someone, is that the Brene Brown talks about it so clearly, and I love the way she describes this. Is it's just you have to set boundaries so that people are very well aware as to what lines to cross and which lines not to cross. And in what we're talking about here, it is very important to set perhaps a boundary of not sharing a personal space between a mentor and a mentee, or even between anybody, right? Maybe there's just a reason for that boundary. And then, of course, back to Tim Cook and maybe removing a boundary of here's an availability to all of you. And so I think that that's so important. And my last little Brene Brown story outside of all of her cool books, there was a movie that my wife and I watched, and I don't know if it was Bridesmaids or one of those movies with a pretty star-studded cast of women on a trip.
No, and they went to wine. They drank wine in Napa.
Yes, and they ran into Brene Brown, and they were all they're all hovered around her table at a meal, and they're like, oh my goodness, it's Brene Brown, and they're all hovered around. And I go, what advice do you have for us? And she goes, boundaries, women, boundaries, ladies. And it was like, oh, and they all took steps back.
Yeah, no, it's boundaries are important, and I think they're important because for setting them. And I think it's also about accepting them from others, right? So I think, and I often show that I highlight that most in the disability community, because I think sometimes we feel like we have the right to know about someone's difference or disability. And I'm great talking about it. There are others who are not. And so accepting that they may not want to share their disability with me, or they may not want to share their disability with you. So understanding and accepting that people have boundaries. And so how do we allow for them so that we don't make them uncomfortable either.
Yeah.
And I had something else about boundaries, but yeah.
Well, bring it back up for sure. But I think it just goes back to kind of full circle on our conversation and where we started with the ask, right? Of when your college friends, if they were to ask you and you were to kind of deflect or whatever, you were putting up a boundary, and they respected that boundary, right? And so I had asked the question of, so when's a good time to ask? And I think it's, you're kind of beating around the bush a little bit in terms of your asking, and the boundaries are going up, and it's realizing, okay, the boundaries are up, let's respect that and move on from it.
Being okay with it.
Yeah.
And then and creating boundaries is okay too, because it allows people to know where those spaces are that you can go. I mean, I will say with disability, and just to bring it back for a second to that, is I've had people, Michael, reach out and grab my hand. Like when I did not give permission for that at all. Like that is a boundary that, and I equate it to what I think is when women are pregnant and people just come up and they put their hand on someone's stomach, and I'm like, nobody allowed that. They didn't say yes to that.
Right.
So I think about that with disability. I mean, whether we help somebody who is blind, whether we help somebody who is a wheelchair user, whether we sometimes we don't ask, and so it's about asking rather than making an assumption. I think that's where boundaries are a key to all of this. And it doesn't mean you're disconnected because you don't want to share a room with someone. It means that you're setting healthy boundaries and you're modeling what it means to take care of yourself, if that's important to you. If it's not, and you're like, yeah, I can't wait, bro, to hang out in the room and whatever, we can talk all night. I don't know. I don't think guys totally always do that, but girls
I do.
definitely.
I talk all night.
But it's also then respecting, does he? Is
right.
Does this twin want to do that too? And if that's great. I know myself, and I've been like this for years. No, I'm good. I can go off into my own room. I like it. I'm good.
Yep.
I love the connection, and I also love the downtime.
Yeah.
And the boundary.
I want to bring up some of your quotes and mantras that you live by that have helped move you forward with all of the things that you do. I mean, you were a CEO for over 20 years. You've studied in all sorts of different places, and now you've written a book. You're on your second book. You've done TED Talks. You've done so much. And so this is so fitting for you in that your mantra is keep moving forward. My story must be heard. I absolutely love this as a mantra, which is one that you live by, and you said you have your Post-it on, and we're going to speak a little bit more about it. And I also want to share a quote that you also stand by, and that's, nobody can make you feel inferior unless you consent it. And I think two powerful mantras and a powerful quote there for you to live by.
I think that, it's funny. Mantras come to us sometimes from tough situations and challenges, right? And I remember I was going through a breakup in a relationship, and I had a really good girlfriend who said to me, she's like, I don't care what's happening with him. Because I was all devastated and upset and, sometimes what we go through in a breakthrough. And that's probably where I did cry. And I, worried about him. And she said, I need you to keep moving forward. That's what's important right now. I need you to remember, keep moving forward. And there are tough times in all of our lives. I will say, definitely in the speaking industry, it is a hustle a lot. It is sometimes you get great audiences and sometimes people are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And especially in Zoom world where you can't see people most of the time. So that's hard. And so I think that keep moving forward. It is a rattled and tattered Post-it that I have taped 1, 2, 3, 4 places on my computer because I want to keep remembering that. And then the other piece is the other mantra is my story needs to be told. Like somebody needs to hear this. And I get into sometimes a place, Michael, where I ask the universe, I'm like, all right, show me that I'm on the right path. Show me that my story needs to be told. Like, show me. And I'll get an email from someone who read my book or saw my TED and says, oh my God, I needed that. Like, thank you, because I've been hiding this part of myself. And that's the memorial or the remembrance of my story needs to be told because it will help somebody, even if it helps one person. I mean, I wrote my book single-handedly because I wanted that book as a 12-year-old. I wish I had had that because I wouldn't have spent so much time hiding.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have. And the quote, the Eleanor Roosevelt quote of nobody can make you feel inferior without your consent, I carry around, because I think that we often blame others for how we feel. And the truth is, we have to acknowledge first with ourselves, right? Like we do more damage sometimes to ourselves and the stories we tell ourselves. And so that's why inviting that person in becomes such a good truth teller or a reality check to some of the stories that we believe about ourselves. We actually are the ones that often make ourselves the most inferior.
Yeah, the stories that we're telling ourselves.
I would never talk to my friend the way that sometimes I talk to myself. And I had to learn that a while ago, which is, why would you ever say that to yourself? Because you'd never say that to a friend,
right?
A good friend.
Right.
So what to say to you?
I love that you just said that. That's literally what I preach as well. The same thing of would you be friends with the person that's in your head sometimes? It's like, I'd ask them to leave, right? Like, are you kidding me?
No, and so how do we show grace and kindness to ourselves? How do we show support to ourselves? And that's the journey. That's why the unhiding becomes important also, is because we allow for that space and that grace.
Yeah. And I know that on your website, you have several worksheets on there that people can download. They can learn more about unhiding. They can learn. You have some checklists there, I believe. You have a robust website. I went through your website and I was like, I need to send this over to my web developer because it's incredible. You have really, really built a beautiful website that has so much to offer. There's so many cool quotes in there, testimonials, but so much to offer too of just resources. Just like you have your book list on there. I saw I was like, whoa, look at this book list. And I mean, that's how I knew about Brene Brown for you, is that was part of your book list. Like just so many different things there in your website. And so I would love for our audio listeners if you could share some of the ways that people can connect with you. And of course, this will all be in the show notes.
Thank you. And thank you for checking out the website. And there's still more to come because I'm working with my amazing website developer, Cynthia Lay, around it because she's been a powerhouse and just thinking about the things that people may need and even how, as my thinking evolves, also how does my website evolve, right? Mm-hmm. Because it is about unhiding and connection and how do we create those spaces so that people can even share their stories? Because sometimes, Michael, when we're in line, people are in line to talk to us for that networking after, people start sharing their stories. I'm like, I can't keep it straight. So I needed a place so that people could go and share their story and give me the option and give them the option if I can use it in an upcoming book, if I can use it on social media, if I can use it so that they have a space too to have agency over how that story gets shared. So that's important. That was a big piece of addition. So I appreciate you checking out my website. And I think there's definitely more to come. I'm working with her now. I am very active on LinkedIn. So I have a lot of conversation about hiding and unhiding and connection and loneliness and how do we expand the conversation on diversity to be fully inclusive. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, which is just my name, Ruth Rathblott. And I'm only the only one, I can say that for sure. That is Ruth Rathblott. I spend a lot of time on Instagram. I probably unhide to people so they get a chance to know me a little bit better on Instagram, where I do share my travels and my love of theater, the things that I like doing. So my personal side. So I'm not just this, unhiding person, this unhiding expert. No, I actually talk about other things too.
Yeah.
And they can see it. And then, yeah, absolutely. My website, ruthrathblott.com. It's a great place to find information and resources.
So cool. It has been an honor to have you on my show today. I'm always honored by having authors and TED Talkers on because it's what I aspire for myself to be, in your shoes one day and be able to have those accomplishments. I'm currently working on my book, which will be published very soon, and TED Talk soon to come, I'm sure. So it has been an honor to have you on the show today. And I do appreciate you sharing and being so vulnerable with us today with everything, all of your experiences, all of your stories, and all of your knowledge, sharing all of that with us as well. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Michael. Thank you for the opportunity to just have space for this conversation. And also the podcast. I mean, that is on my list of checklists. I want to get a podcast. And so what do I need to do? So I can learn so much from you. And I also appreciate your awareness of yourself and sharing parts of you that are vulnerable, because that's what makes a conversation interesting. It would be super boring if it were just me talking. That would not be a fun show at all.
Well, I could listen to you all day, and I will be, because I got to finish up your TED Talk. So I will be listening to the rest of that, and we will be in touch about podcasting, because if there's anybody I can help with podcasts, I am so more than happy. This is a dream come true for me to be able to do this, to be able to sit in this chair and be able to interview people like you. So I appreciate that, and I'm happy to help.
Thank you. No, and I can't wait for you to listen to the audiobook too, because that's good, of a space. It takes the TED Talk and goes to a very different level. So yeah, I'm excited for you to share it with you and your listeners. So thanks for giving me the space, Michael.
Thank you for listening to The Michael Esposito Show. For show notes, video clips, and more episodes, go to michaelespositoinc.com/podcast. Thank you again to our sponsor, Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. That's DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. This episode was produced by Uncle Mike at the iHeart Studios in Poughkeepsie. Special thanks to Lara Rodrian for the opportunity and my team at Michael Esposito Inc. Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show.